Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to podcast number 36. Mama, can you believe it's been that many?
I cannot believe it's been that many. We were going to do like 3. We were going to do
Well,
3.
yeah, but you know what? The more we do of this, the more we realize it helps us.
We're
We
definitely
learn so much.
we're definitely teaching to ourselves. So
Exactly. I sure don't want to quit. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Keith Shelton. You see my beautiful bride, Sonar. She's my sidekick when we try to go through these Bible studies. And tonight we're going to kick off. We finished up First Samuel last time, and this time we're going to kick off Second Samuel. And just remember, Second Samuel and First Kings have so much in common. They parallel each other. And sweetie, if you'll put up the slides, we'll kick off. There we go. That's where we're starting. Next one. We can go through these pretty fast. Y'all have seen these. These are for your reference. Pause, do screenshots, save them, put them in your Bibles. They're good helps. And there's the monarchy. That's where we're telling you. That just backs up what we already told you. Second Samuel and First Chronicles are pretty much paralleling each other. Well, where are we? Okay, here's what I want you to understand. This is the slide that I showed you where the tribes of Israel were supposed to go. This is the Holy Land. The body of water at the top is the Sea of Galilee. The body of water at the bottom is the Dead Sea. To the west is the Mediterranean Sea. This is the Holy Land. And this is showing you where the 12 tribes of Israel were supposed to go. Next one, sweet. This is where, at the end of Judges and beginning of the reign of Saul, this is essentially all that the nation of Israel consisted of. We've talked about why that is. We talked about the failures that once Joshua had accomplished all the military victories and basically defeated all the military forces, the tribes just basically failed to move out. They failed to move out and move on to occupy what they were supposed to be occupying. So, next one. All right, the consolidated kingdom under Saul. This is what Saul was able to accomplish when he was ruler, and that happened in First Samuel. Okay, next one. So when are we? All right, David was born about 1040 BC. David becomes king of Judah about 1010 BC. David becomes king of Israel about 1003 BC. David ruled for a total of about 40 years. He was 30 years old when he became king, but he only became king over the area of Judah, which is the south part of Israel. And he did that for about 3.5 years. And then is when he was anointed king over all of Israel. So how did we end up last time? Well, Saul and Jonathan were defeated. Saul commits a multitude of sins on top of the ones he already committed, with which at Endor, the spirit of Samuel tells Saul that Saul's time's up, both his life and his kingdom. The Philistines defeat Saul and Jonathan the next day. Saul takes his own life. Saul's body is desecrated, and the men of Jabesh Gilead retrieve the bodies of Saul and Jonathan and give them a burial. This happened in the northern part of Israel up toward the southern edge of the Sea of Galilee. Not on the Sea of Galilee, but in that region. All right, here's what we're going to be doing tonight. Here's a quick overview, quick summary of 2 Samuel chapters 1 through 4. We're not going to cover in a lot of detail. We told y'all we don't believe it's our purpose to read the Bible for you. So we're going to do a quick summary of Samuel chapters 1 through 4. Why is that? Because chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7 are absolutely very important. And then chapter 7 is a monumental chapter that you'll see when we get there. Okay. Chapter 5, Jerusalem's captured and made the political capital of Israel. Chapter 6, David brings the ark to Jerusalem, to the tabernacle of David, makes Jerusalem the spiritual capital of Israel as well. And then chapter 7 is the Davidic covenant, and that basically seals the future of the world. Now, a summary of 2 Samuel. I'm just going to hit these bullet points, and hopefully we'll wrap them up here shortly. Saul and Jonathan are dead when David returns to Ziklag after raiding and killing the Amalekite bands to the south. If you remember the Amalekite bands, when David was off, now again, he's in exile, still running from Saul, but he had kind of made a little home for himself at Ziklag, with he and his 2 wives and his band of merry men. And he was off on a military foray, and while he was gone, the Amalekites came and basically raided Ziklag and burned it and took off as much booty and people as they could for slaves. And so David took off after them, and he was successful. He got his wives back, his kids back, got the booty, all the spoils. And then, he brought back enough to share with a lot of the tribes in Judah. And then a young Amalekite comes from the battlefield of Gilboa. And if you remember that, Gilboa was up there in northern Israel, like I said, just to the south of the Sea of Galilee. And he brings Saul's crown and armlet to David, claiming to have killed Saul for David. Now, that's not what matches the end of 1 Samuel that says what really happened to Saul. But this let's call him a kid. He's trying to outsmart the system, and he thinks he's going to, win favors from David by claiming he killed Saul and got the crown and the royal armlet to bring it to David. Well, David actually has the Amalekite executed for daring to kill, quote, the Lord's anointed. David is anointed king over the tribe of Judah and Jabesh Gilead with his stepbrother Joab as his general. If you remember, he sent an entreaty to the men of Jabesh Gilead because they had treated Saul's body and Saul's body and the body of his sons that had been killed in the battle the day before. David sent them a really nice entreaty for that, and basically they gave their allegiance to David. Abner, however, Saul's general, installs Ishbosheth, who's another son of Saul, as a proxy king over the rest of Israel. Well, Ishbosheth is a very weak person, and basically that's why I called him a proxy king, because he's basically just doing what Abner tells him to. Now, Joab and Abner set up let's call it a, quote, friendly competition among soldiers. It turns into a small skirmish that leads to the death of Asahel, a brother of Joab. Enmity between the men of David and the men of Ishbosheth lead to a long war, with David gaining and Ishbosheth diminishing. Now, David then takes a number of new wives while he's in Hebron. And again, Hebron is David's capital of Judah. That's where David's from, the tribe of Judah, and David was anointed king over the tribe of Judah, and his headquarters was in Hebron. And David took on some more wives there. I made the note of, remember Deuteronomy 17:17, where Moses said, we said in either last time or time before that, it was no secret that Israel was going to have a king, even though that's not the way God had it set up when he brought them out of Egypt and they sojourned on the Exodus. It was prophesied that Israel was going to have a king, but that king was not to have too many wives. The main reason being is because Moses thought it was not going to be good, to have that many distractions. So, but nonetheless, David did take some, Ishbosheth accuses Abner of taking one of his concubines he inherited from his father Saul. Now you got to remember, when a king passed away, the heir would inherit the wives and the concubines and all the of what was supposed to go to the firstborn.
So
And
question,
go ahead.
Keith. Yeah, you say that they inherited it, but aren't we pretty much going off here what would have been tradition for pagan kings? Because he's the first king, really. I mean, well, I guess Saul was, but he. What tradition are we talking about here? Are we talking about pagan traditions?
We're talking about pagan traditions, yes. But
Okay.
that's all they had to go on because, like you said, Saul was the first king, so there was no pattern.
Yeah.
But based on what they had observed in other nations, that's what was supposed to happen. Is the heir was supposed to take the wives of the father, wives and concubines of the father, plus whatever the oldest was supposed to inherit. And so, and again, let's be clear. Scripture does not say that Abner had actually committed the sin. Okay, it only says that Ishbosheth accused him of it. But boy, did it really, get under Abner's skin that he did that. So what did Abner do? He turned on Ishbosheth and makes a covenant with David to give David all of Israel to rule. I guess the personal enmity between Ishbosheth and Abner probably was so bad that Abner said, look, if, I can't control this guy and he's not going to do what I need him to do. David was a pretty doggone good warrior. David was a pretty doggone good leader. Militarily, David was a very successful, guy that always made could always overcome bad odds. I mean, he only had a band of 400 one time and it grew to 600, but that's all he ever had. David never had a large force, but the scripture makes it clear David was very successful when he was being let's just call him a Robin Hood on the run from Saul. So Abner figured out, if I've got to pick my poison, I think I'm gonna make it with David. So that's what he did. He went to David, made a covenant with David to give David the rest of Israel to rule. Well, Joab distrusted Abner's motive and he murders Ahab. Well,
Who
was it
who
because
who was Joab?
Joab was David's general,
And Abner was
Saul's general.
okay. Okay.
Let's call him a commander in chief, if you will.
That's fine. That's fine. I got it.
Joab was David's commander in chief, and Abner was Saul's commander in chief. But Saul's gone, and Abner's trying to basically say, I've had it pretty good, and I don't want to give it up. So he's trying to figure out who he can, be the leader of the military for, and he's now picked David. Well, that naturally pits him as I won't say an adversary, but a rival, let's call him a rival with Joab, because Joab has had that role with David all this time while David was on the run for 10 years. So, and besides that, Ahab is the one that killed Asahel, which was one of Joab's brothers. Now, David deflects himself from the murder of Abner and curses the house of Joab's father to suffer materially and physically. And by cursing the father of Joab, what did he do? He covered Joab, he covered his brother and their descendants, and the descendants of the son Asahel that had been murdered by Abner. Now, on hearing of Ahab's murder in Hebron, Ishbosheth lost heart and despaired. Benaiah and his brother Rechab, both Benjaminite captains for Ishbosheth, killed Ishbosheth in a midday stealth attack and brought his head to David. Here's another time where, hey, we are not going to throw our lot in with Ishbosheth. We started out in this direction, but we don't think it's wise to stay in that direction. So we're going to get rid of him. We're going to take us and all our troops and we're going to align them with David. Well, David executes Benaiah and Rechab for the killing of a righteous person. Now, he didn't say the Lord's anointed. David didn't concede that the Lord had anointed Ishbosheth as Saul's son, but he did say he was a righteous person. David knew, it was no secret. David knew he was supposed to be king. He knew that it was prophesied. The scepter was supposed to be in the tribe of Judah. He knew that. And he knew that Samuel had anointed him as a king to succeed Saul years and years and years ago. And so, David, you would have to think that David is playing out the role of someone who is going to let God decide when he's supposed to do it. And it turns out, these humans are trying to make it happen. And David's, trying to let them know, no, I'm not even part of this. I will be king when God says I'm king. Well, in this case, the humans took the control away from David, and by default he's it. But he sure made them pay. So
well, there again, Keith, that's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Is they didn't know what to pattern this after. They're so secular in their thinking and so pagan, influenced, that they're trying to play like, the Game of Thrones, basically, of that's how things went. You murdered everybody's family, after a king died, so you could wipe out his seed. And, then you took over and you had a clean slate. And that's kind of what you see trying to go on here with the people around David, who didn't realize this was a new kingdom. This was God's kingdom, and that David was going to do it the way God wanted it to be done, under God's power, not their power.
Exactly. That's exactly the point I was making, was that this David's trying to do a new thing. He's not trying to model after all the other kings and kingdoms, around him. David's trying to do it the way God's going to allow it to happen. So now finally, Mephibosheth, Jonathan's lame son, is introduced. That's all I'm going to say about him. He's introduced in chapters 1 through 4. There's a reason, and we'll talk about it when the time comes. All right, let's review real quick. Now, here's what I want to tell y'all. We're going to give Chuck Missler credit for this. Chuck Missler's organizations produced these next few slides, but I tell you, Chuck Missler, Snar and I do not agree with everything we hear Chuck Missler say, but Chuck Missler is or at least was, he passed away in 2018, but he really, really, really was a great Bible teacher. Oh my gosh, he knew so much background material and worked so hard. He was an engineer by profession. He was a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. So unbelievably smart. I mean, I'd love to know what that guy's IQ was, or some of it, what he made on the ACT or whatever. He's just a virtual, as we call it, a virtual cesspool of information.
And not only that, I mean, he just seemed to have a sincere calling to teach the Bible.
Yeah, he sure did. All right. Well, so I believe it's the next 9 slides are all products of Chuck Missler's organization, and we're making use of them, and we don't mind giving him credit. All right. The names you heard me mentioning in chapters 1 through 4, we're fixing to review them right now. Nahash, let's see, the 3 tribes we're going to be that were covered basically by chapters 1 through 4 are the Ammonites, the tribe of Judah, tribe of Ammon, tribe of Judah, tribe of Benjamin. Nahash had 2 daughters, Abigail and Zeruiah, and Judah, as you know, had Obed, Jesse, and David. And we've studied before where David fits in the line coming from Adam. But Abigail marries David and becomes his second wife after Michal, Saul's daughter, had been taken away from him when he was forced to flee and became an exile. All right. Now, where did Asahel, Joab, and Abishai come from? Well, they were three sons of a sister of Abigail. And it just so happens that after Zeruiah's first husband died, she married Jesse. So what did that make Asahel, Joab, and Abishai to David? They were stepbrothers. Okay. Now let's look to the right side. On the tribe of Benjamin, you had Jehiel. Jehiel had Kish and Saul. Saul had more sons, but the two that we're referencing are Jonathan and Ishbosheth. And another son was Ner, and he had a son named Abner. So what's the relationship between Abner and Saul?
Well, they were brothers. No,
cousins.
I mean, yeah.
Cousins. Okay. So David and Joab were stepbrothers, and Saul and Abner were cousins. So you see how the names that we've referenced earlier, they're starting to make sense, and you can see how they're laid out. All right. Number 3. Okay. In addition to Jonathan Ishbosheth, Saul had among his daughters a daughter named Michal, and Michal first married David. Okay. 4. And this is what I spoke of a while ago. Saul had Abner as his commander-in-chief. David had Joab as his commander-in-chief. And we've already talked about what the relationship was. All right. Number 5. All right. Saul and Jonathan were killed. Abner then tries to install, and that's all you can say, install, because everybody knew David had been anointed king. But Abner didn't want to let that happen. So Abner took another son of Saul's that had survived the battle, Ishbosheth, and tried to get him installed as the new king of Israel, which for a while he was successful. All right. Now, what happened when Abner and David kind of, formed their pact? Abner had killed Asahel. Before they formed the pact, Abner had killed Asahel in the skirmishes that had gone on between David's band as king of Judah and Ishbosheth's bands as king of it is the northern part of Israel. All right, 7. All right, so here's what happened. Saul and Jonathan are dead. Asahel is dead. What's next? 8. Joab and Abishai, they conspire to kill Abner, which they do. And number 9. And then the Gibeonites, which were a sub-tribe of the tribe of Benjamin, these two guys kill Ishbosheth, thinking that they were doing David a favor and that they were going to be rewarded by King David. And so that is how we've covered chapters 1 through 4 of 2 Samuel for you. And look, as we're going through these, if you'll pause on these slides 1 through 9, they'll make all the sense in the world of what you read in chapters 1 through 4. Okay? All right, what happens? David's anointed king over all Israel. Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "Behold, we are your bone and flesh. In times past, when Saul was king over us, it was you who led out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to you, you shall be shepherd of my people in Israel, and you shall be prince." Hebrew word there being Nagid, which literally means leader or ruler over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. Now, how did the elders of Israel appeal to David? First of all, we're blood brothers. We're all descendants of Jacob. Then David, we're kind of sucking up to you because we know you had distinguished yourself as a hero hero of all of Israel while you were in the service of Saul. Besides that, you're the one who had slain Goliath after all. Okay. And the third way they did it was they remembered that the Lord had called David and anointed David through Samuel to be ruler over them. It's kind of like we knew that already, but we got talked into going a different direction. But that obviously hadn't worked out. I mean, how many times do we see that the elders of the nation of Israel are just basically nothing more than opportunists? It's what what they show themselves to be. But the third item there, they knew that all along anyway, but they thought they might have something better, and so they were going to go along with what Abner wanted. And then when Abner got killed, Saul's other son, I can't remember his name. I can't keep pronouncing his name. When he got killed,
Ibasheth.
then
Ibasheth or something like that.
Ibasheth.
Yeah.
When he got killed, then they were more than ready to let David, take him, because you got to remember now, turmoil inside the nation of Israel. I mean, all the nations around Israel. Saul, for all his faults, he was a strong leader, and he was pretty much respected by everybody except the Philistines. Okay, but when you've got turmoil, when you've got strife within, boy, these nations around you, I mean, they start growing hair on the back of their hands. Their fangs grow. They just start drooling because they're thinking, okay, if we're ever going to throw off Israelite rule, now may be the time. And so this is what you do to not let that happen.
Civil unrest always made the any nation, vulnerable, and everybody knew
outsiders.
That. Right.
They're vulnerable to outsiders. That's exactly right. So it didn't take long for them to know they better throw in with David. So, all right, here's the first important point of tonight's lesson. Jerusalem is made the political and spiritual capital, and the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, "You will not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off," thinking, "David cannot come in here." Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David, and David said on that day, "Whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind." David basically mocking them because that's what they said. That's in so many words, that's what they said to David.
If you said it today, it'd be said kind of like, "Look, we don't even have to fight you with our good troops. We'll just use the ones that are crippled and can't see. They can whoop you." That's what they're saying.
They can keep you out. But,
that's right.
And I mean, rightfully so. Let's say how many. Go to the next slide. It'll make all the point in the world. Okay, you've seen this before. This is what the land of Canaan looked like when the Israelites came out of Egypt. Okay, what if you can pick out the Dead Sea, the north end of the Dead Sea? I've told you this before. The very northern tip of the Dead Sea, turn left and go about 20 miles, and that's Jerusalem. Well, if you look right there, who's sitting right on top of Jerusalem? It's a long, small. It's a small tribe.
That's it with the red dot in it, isn't the Jebusites?
That's exactly right. The Jebusites with the red dot in it. The red dot being Jerusalem. Okay, They were there. They were small, but they were fierce. They were mighty warriors. Okay. Now let's look at the next one. Was Joshua able to conquer Jerusalem? No.
I'm looking back. Okay. It's close though, wasn't it?
Well, that's just it. They could go to Jerusalem and no further. They never could take the city of Jerusalem. And here we're fixing to make some points here in just a minute. All right, look at the consolidated kingdom under Saul. If you'll look real close, there's a yellow circle around Jerusalem. Now, the line, there's a yellow line that runs from east to west. And to the south of that is the area of Judah. That was the area that David took over after Saul died. Abinasheth, golly, whatever his name is, I can't remember. Anyway, he took over the rest of it. Okay. Abner and him had the north, called Israel. David had the south, Judah. But what was in the middle? That dividing line is what divided them. But what was right there, dead center? Jerusalem. And why is there a yellow circle around Jerusalem? Because they couldn't defeat it. Now, they pretty much neutralized the Jebusites as a nation, but they couldn't defeat Jerusalem. Not yet, anyway. All right, next one. All right.
Now, you remember, though, that David had taken the head of Goliath and posted it up on Golgotha. Is that right? And
What was outside the city.
outside, so that the Jebusites could see that, kind of as a precursor, I think, to him taking Jerusalem eventually.
And that's a good point. That's a
Yeah.
good point. They knew David was a formidable person. David was not a typical teenager. There's no doubt that they remembered the name of David. Okay. But here's what you're looking at. This is the ancient city of what was Jerusalem. Okay. And remember this, Jerusalem, how many of you remember the Amarna letters? We'll touch that in a minute. How many of you remember the Amarna letters that we talked about from the time period of Judges? One of the cities whose king of the city state that sent the letters to Pharaoh that were collectively called the Amarna letters came from the city of Jerusalem. Now, it wasn't called Jerusalem by the Jebusites at the time, but here's what made Jerusalem so formidable. It was surrounded on three sides by deep, deep valleys, and it was a walled city. So whatever army was going to attack it from any of those three sides, was going to have to, first of all, cross the valley, climb those ridges, and then scale the walls. The weakest thing to Jerusalem militarily was to come from the north. Now, here's what I want you to understand. This view that we're looking at, this artist rendering, the north-south line is from the lower left to the upper right. That's the south to north line, which you'll see here in just a minute. All right. Next one. All right. This is a drawing. Okay, just very slowly, let everybody absorb this. See the three valleys, the Tyropian Valley on the west side, the Valley of Hinnom on the south, Kidron Valley on the east. Now, the Mount of Olives and Mount Zion are to the east and west. Mount Moriah is where the temple was going to end up. You got to understand, at this point in time, there was no temple. There was no Temple Mount. Okay, everybody got that? This is just the drawing to show you geographically how everything lay. Now go back to the one before that, sweetie. All right, now does it make sense? Look to the upper right, that ridge from the lower left to the upper right. Not only are you moving from the south to the north, but you're also moving from lower elevation to higher elevation. And now go to the next one. And so what you were looking at that now shows another encirclement, and at the very north end is the temple. Well, that was the bare hill that was in the previous drawing. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, here's a point I want to make to you. Take a look at that photo, and what you're actually looking at is a pre-excavation photo of the city, of what then would have been the city of Jerusalem. And what you're looking at is the wall, and on the top of that wall, there's the Dome of the Rock, the mosque, and all that there, that is Mount Moriah. And you see looking down below and to the right, you see nothing that looks like a building, a wall city, nothing. Okay, now go back to the previous. Okay, see where it says City of David? The City of David, now go back to the one before that. The City of David, that circular area that was in circle there, that was called the City of David, you are now on this slide, you are actually looking at old historic Jerusalem when the Jebusites had it. When David conquered it, that's where he put his palace. Inside these walls is where the, quote, City of David became. Now go to the third slide from that, sweetie, right there. What you're looking at, folks, is what covered the City of David after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD. When Jesus said not a stone will be left sitting on top of the other.
You're saying what covered, you're meaning what was left after the destruction. That is it. That is.
No, what I'm
there's
saying
nothing
is,
there.
well, here you think there's nothing there. For many, many years, people thought there was nothing there. Mm-hmm. What you're looking at are fields that farmers were plowing, and some stones they heaped up to make fences and terraces so they could grow stuff on there. But the City of David, it turns out, is underneath what you're looking at. Is that not unbelievable? Mm. The City of David has been excavated. It's still being excavated. They found the Palace of David. They found the old walled city of Jerusalem, and it is under what you're looking at right there. This is the south end of that ridge. At the north end of that ridge is the Temple Mount, and where supposedly, and on the other side of that mosque right there, the Dome of the Rock, that's supposedly where Abraham was going to slay Isaac as a sacrifice. Somewhere in that area outside of, it could have been within those walls. It certainly wasn't within the walls of the old city, but that's where David brought the skull of Goliath. But what you're looking at is the surface of the ground before archaeologists figured out that the City of David, the old Jebusite city of Jerusalem, is under all those fields right there. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay. Now, more on Jerusalem. In Judges 19:10 and 1 Chronicles 11:4 and 5, Jerusalem is called Jebus. In the Amarna letters, remember those? Jerusalem was referred to as Jerusalem, the city of peace. Remember those Amarna letters, which came from the area of Canaan, were only written by the kings of the undefeated cities still standing in the promised land. None of the cities that had been defeated by Joshua, there were no letters found in that big bundle of letters at that Pharaoh's palace that had come from any of the cities that Joshua and them had defeated and occupied. Only the cities that were still left unconquered, and Jerusalem was one of them. The Jebusites were of Amorite, Hittite intermarriages, Ezekiel 16:3 and 45. Jerusalem aroused the wrath and fury of God, Jeremiah 32:31. Jesus spoke of his love and longing for Jerusalem when he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her children under her wings." It's Matthew 23:37. Destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, as Jesus predicted, New Jerusalem is prophesied as the site of the millennial temple from which Jesus will rule in Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Isaiah. And in Ezekiel, you need to go to chapters 40 through 45, I believe it is, and you will find out that the New Jerusalem temple is going to be a, when we cover the third part of what we're going to cover tonight, you'll understand why Ezekiel chapters 40 through 45 will play a major role in that. That's all I can tell you right now. All right. More from chapter 5. Hiram, king of Tyre, a foreign kingdom seeking good relations with David, built a palace for David and his many wives. The army of David was attacked twice by the Philistines. They were defeated the first time and had their graven images they brought destroyed by David's soldiers. You would think that the Philistines thought they were going to have an easy time. They didn't. They were soundly defeated and so badly defeated that all the graven images that were left, they were gathered up and burned and destroyed by David's soldiers. Then the Philistines were defeated a very soon second time, and they were driven all the way to the city of Gezer. If y'all remember what Gezer is, there was a homework video about child sacrifice. Gezer was a well established pagan
worship
temple,
center, yeah.
worship center where they worshipped Baal, and this is where the phrase of pass your children through the fire was had a real life application. Now, both times David inquired of the Lord and obeyed the commands of the Lord. One time, God told him a direct attack. Second time, God told him a sneak attack. And both of them worked. All right, next things. Let's move the ark. Again, David gathered all the choice men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, whose name is called by the name the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. So they set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart, and they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, accompanying the ark of God. And Ahio went before the ark. Then David and all the house of Israel played music before the Lord on all kinds of instruments of fir wood, on harps, on stringed instruments, on tambourines, on sistrums, and on cymbals. That's 2 Samuel 6, 1 through 5. And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error. The Hebrew word there for error actually means irreverence. And he died there by the ark of God. And David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah. And he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah, outburst against Uzzah to this day. David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? So David would not move the ark of the Lord with him into the city of David. But David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed the Gittite 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. At 6 through 11. Now let's pause here and ask the question, why was God so harsh when you would think that what Uzzah did was a human reaction? Man, that thing's fixing to fall out of there. Let me steady it. I'm 68 years old, and I've heard many preachers preach on it. I've heard many people teach on it. I've worked on it my own self. Here's where I am. Ask the simple question. How was the ark supposed to be moved if it was going to be moved?
First of all, it wasn't supposed to be on a cart.
Well, go, Snar, if you would, go 3 slides forward. Right there. What are those long poles for that go through rings on either side of it?
That was for the priest to hold on to so they wouldn't touch the ark when they moved the ark.
That was the way it was supposed to be carried.
But it had been moved on a cart before with the oxen coming back from the Philistines.
That's exactly right. And based on the context of that story, who was guarding the ark the whole way?
Which time?
When it was coming from the Philistines back to the Hebrew territory.
I don't remember. I didn't think anybody was. I thought it was coming on its own.
That's my point. There was no human watching over it.
Yeah.
God was watching over it.
So is that the deal here? Is that your
No.
position is that he was watching over it? He was supposed to be watching over it and they didn't need to touch it? You say what you think. I'm gonna say what I think after you get through and say what you think about it.
Well, first of all, let's go back to number 2 of that.
We're gonna run out of time.
We got to hurry.
Okay. Okay.
This is something David wanted to do. Did God tell him to move it? No. This is something David wanted to do, and this is what they thought up about how to move it. Put it in a cart. But is that how it was supposed to be moved, absent some supernatural event? No, it was supposed to be carried by priest, and they were supposed to be on their feet walking. That way, the 4 corners being held up by 4 different people, they could handle uneven ground. They could handle rocky ground. You see what I'm saying? And that's where I came from. That's why I said, that's why God said, y'all aren't being reverent to me.
This is definitely one of those great mysteries that I want to ask about when I get up there. But I do have a thought on this, and my thought has been, I'm like you, I've tried to work through this myself. But you'll remember, we've talked about this a lot, like what made the area around the burning bush, holy, that, you're standing on holy ground. Probably, they probably walked those sheep over it many, many times before. It wasn't holy ground then. Why is it holy ground now? It's holy because God is there, because the presence of God is there. And how many times have we seen in the past that the presence of God would kill people? I mean, his very presence is more than man could handle. Like seeing him, or they'd the mountains on fire. I mean, just the power you couldn't have somebody come up and touch the ark and steady it and then be like, oh, well, it's okay if we touch the ark as long as we're ministering to the ark. There'd be new things that would come all around that, it wouldn't be a without fail, this is what it is, it ain't what it ain't thing. That the power that if God is here, you get too near it, you will die. Yeah. And I just don't think they can make an exception just because his intentions were good.
And you got to remember, this is the Old Testament system, and strictness is.
And for all we know, when he eventually, I'm believing that he eventually, made it into heaven, and God said, what would you touch that ark for? You knew you was going to die. Something like that. I just feel like, that's kind of how it is, You can't be touching the ark. Come on, sit down over here and don't be touching things you're not supposed to touch.
I agree. All right, let's go to number 3, because here's where we're getting to the good stuff. Now it was told King David, saying, the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. Then David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. Now as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord. When she despised him in her heart. Isn't it just like
Careful.
Okay. So they brought the ark of the Lord.
Look, I think we need to say here, I don't think you said too much about it before, but she was brought, David asked for her to be returned to him, and she was returned to him as a wife. And, this is one of the things I disagree with Chuck Missler about. I believe that David knew how much she loved him. She helped him, escape. I think that was a love match, but
and he loved her because of the, he wasn't willing to do anything for the other sister, but he was willing to try to win Michal. So he loved her, but Where
But
this,
something has
where,
happened. I mean, maybe she, maybe her position and power, as the queen, or whatever, got to her, and that's what
Mhm.
I've always looked at this as, that, she thought they were better than everybody else, and, maybe even would put herself above God, or
Mhm.
the kingship above that, where David didn't, and
Well,
humbled himself.
yeah, I call it pride. She had
Yeah, I
a
think so.
big head of pride on her, and
Hmm.
she thought David was behaving in a way that was beneath his station in life, him being king now, see. But anyway, so they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. Then David offered up, and y'all remember what we've said before. Um, italicized and underlined is the scripture according to Keith and Sonar. So there's a reason we've highlighted these things. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. Then he distributed among all the people, among the whole multitude of Israel, both the women and the men, to everyone a loaf of bread, a piece of meat, a cake of raisins. So all the people departed, everyone to his house. Okay, go to the next one.
Mr. Salty said that God had very specific instructions for moving the ark. He was just commenting. I missed that earlier about the ark being moved. What you were saying, just that they were
Well,
supposed to.
exactly. And there was no provision for the ark to have been moved on a cart, without God having said, that's how I want it moved. So absent that, he already had instructions of how to move the cart, and they weren't obeyed. It was not
Exactly.
being moved by the priest. All right, go to number 4. Then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly," the Hebrew word there meant openly, uncovers himself. So David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his house to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore, I will play music before the Lord. I will be even more undignified than this, and will be humble in my own sight. But as for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor." Therefore, Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. Now, the verse 20 is basically David giving her a very smart aleck answer. But now, here's what we want to focus on: the tabernacle that David built. That has absolutely unbelievable implications going forward. So, what's the next screen there? David erected a tabernacle. What about Moses' tabernacle? All right, let's figure out where the other tabernacle, Moses' tabernacle, is. During the conquest, Joshua had his main camp in the tabernacle at Gilgal. After the military conquest ended and the land was divided, the tabernacle was moved to Shiloh in Ephraimite territory. That was Joshua's tribe, and stayed there for most of the Judges period. How long was the Judges period? Over 300 years. So for a very long time, the center of worship for the nation of Israel was Shiloh. The ark and tabernacle were at Bethel briefly while Phinehas, grandson of Aaron, was alive. After the ark was captured by the Philistines, the tabernacle was moved to Nob, near Saul's hometown of Gibeah. But after Saul slaughtered the priests for giving aid to David, the tabernacle was moved to Gibeon, which is in First Chronicles. While the ark came to the tabernacle of David, the actual tabernacle of Moses remained at Gibeon until Solomon brought the tabernacle and all of its furnishings to the temple in Jerusalem. Now you got to remember, David didn't build the temple. Solomon did. Solomon is one of David's sons. We're going to cover that. But David put the ark in a tabernacle that David built. So where does the, quote, tabernacle of David come into play going forward? All right. The first reference of it is Isaiah 16:5. For the extortioner is at hand, devastation ceases, the oppressors are consumed out of the land. In mercy, the throne will be established, and one will sit on it in truth. In the tabernacle of David, judging and seeking justice and hastening righteousness. Now, if you remember, Isaiah came long after David and Solomon. Go to the next one. And here's Amos, chapter 9, verses 11 and 12. On that day, I will raise up the tabernacle of David, which had fallen down, and repair its damages. I will raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says the Lord who does this thing. Now, remember what the Hebrew word for Gentiles was? Goy. What did the Hebrew word goy literally mean? Every person, every family, every tribe, every people, every nation that was not of Israel was a goy. So this is everybody but Israel. Amos is saying that the tabernacle of David is going to be resurrected. What do we not wonder why neither Isaiah nor Amos referred to the restoration of the tabernacle of Moses? There's a reason. And we as Gentiles, we as non-Jews, owe God's plan to offer us the plan of salvation to the fact that he wasn't going to raise up the tabernacle of Moses. He was going to raise up the tabernacle of David. Okay, next. What distinguishes the tabernacle of David from the tabernacle of Moses? Well, the tabernacle of Moses represents the Old Testament system that lasted until John the Baptist. That's Matthew 11:13. We've talked about that either last week or the week before. The tabernacle of David, however, represents the coming New Testament system that would replace the Old Testament system. The tabernacle of Moses required strict adherence to the law, including interacting with Jehovah at a certain place through a human intermediary. The tabernacle of David allowed freedom of worship, allowed the worshiper to express adulation, obeisance, humility, repentance, straight to Jehovah. And there I put parentheses. The veil would be torn from top to bottom. Do you remember that? We've made that point before. Okay? The veil, the instance that Jesus' body, the instance his life passed from his body, that veil was torn in the temple that separated the Holy of Holies, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was going to be, from anyone else. The high priest was the only one that could go in, and he was going in on behalf of every person, family, tribe in the nation of Israel. And this is one of the changes. We don't have that anymore. The tabernacle of Moses required Gentiles to first become proselytized Jew. You had to become a Jew before you could basically consider yourself saved. Now, who's the best known example of that? Everybody believes that the eunuch from Ethiopia that's spoken of in the book of Acts is an example of a proselytized Jew. Everybody's pretty sure he wasn't born Jewish, but he's come to the Jewish faith probably because of the heavy presence of Judaism in North Africa and in Egypt, especially in the city of Alexandria. So wherever it happened, it happened, and everybody understands that Ethiopian eunuch was a proselytized Jew. That's a good example of that. But the tabernacle of David represents a Jehovah God who would welcome all people who seek him to worship him into his house, and a Jehovah God who would live within his people and not in any specific geographical location. We've covered that the last two lessons. So aren't we glad that Isaiah and Amos prophesy the restoration of the temple, the tabernacle of David, rather than the tabernacle of Moses? Hallelujah. Yes, indeed.
Hmm.
At the tabernacle of David, David and the people, and this is all scriptural, made sacrifices of praise instead of animal sacrifices to Jehovah. Psalms 27:6. Clapped their hands, Psalms 47:1. Lifted their hands in worship, Psalms 130:34. Shouted, Psalms 47:1 and 5. Danced, 2 Samuel 6:16. Psalms 149:3. Sought the Lord, 1 Chronicles 16. Played their instruments, 1 Chronicles, Psalms. Okay, this is the tabernacle of freedom, not the law. Okay.
So can I ask some questions? In that tabernacle of David, there was no veil?
No,
No veil.
there's no indication there was a veil put in that tabernacle.
Would David have been the only one to go in there, or were other people in there, or
The scriptures, so far as I can tell,
it was David?
So far as I can tell, the priest would go in, but it was all about freedom. It was all about the people of God being able to express themselves to Yahweh at that tabernacle of David.
Okay.
Got to remember this. The reason I'm making that distinction is because there is scripture that says that the sacrifices, the Mosaic sacrifices, were still going on in the old tabernacle of Moses. Okay?
Even though the ark wasn't there.
Even though the ark wasn't there.
Okay.
Folks, that's what I'm saying. It's such an unbelievable thing, but you almost, when you hear people talk about it and they start talking about the distinctions, you're going, wow, 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 because so few people ever even make the distinction. They just fly right through it. Tabernacle of David, tent that David built, right on through it, 90 miles an hour. They never make a point of it. But when you go back and look at Isaiah and look at Amos, why did God say it's the tabernacle of David that's going to be rebuilt, restored, resurrected? Why? Why was it not the tabernacle of Moses?
Because the tabernacle of Moses was the tabernacle of law, not
exactly
the new covenant.
Exactly. Now, is this scripture according to Key? No. Let me tell you something. This was the argument of the believers and preachers in the New Testament. Let's go.
So we are up on an hour. So are you thinking you want to keep going, or do you want to cut it off and pick up here? Or because I think there's a lot to be unpacked here. I'm trying to look ahead.
Okay, let's do that then. Let's just okay, here's our next slide, and this is where we'll pick up next time.
Okay.
Paul and Silas confirm the prophecy of Amos. This is the good news for us who are not Jews. This is, if you recall, the last two lessons, we went through scriptures where it was prophesied that salvation in the Lord would be granted to the Gentiles. God would start gathering back his nations. Remember that? Psalms 82. Okay.
Yes.
Let me read just as hang on a second. I guarantee you I can find it real quick. Hang on one second. Psalms 82.
Yeah, I think this is this is important. I want us to let's start next week after you read this. I want to start next week with of course the Temple of David and the New Testament and take a good look at this, because this is good stuff right here.
Okay, Psalms 82. Now you got to remember, Psalms 82 is when God rebukes the little g gods that he had basically allowed to be the behind the scenes rulers of the nations after the Tower of Babel. Well, Psalms 82 verses 1 through, let's see, 1 through 7, he is condemning them because he's basically said, you know, I gave them to you. I let you have them, but you were supposed to be helping them. You're supposed to be judging them fairly. You were supposed to be treating them right. But instead, you let them bribe. You taught them how to bribe. You taught them how. You showed favoritism. You led them to worship you. You didn't keep them in the right way. Well, so that's verses 1 through 7. But here's what Psalms 82:8 says: "Arise, O God." This is the psalmist exhorting back to God now. "Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations." That was the Psalms 82 passage. It has so much implication for so many reasons that we've already studied. But that verse 8, he's saying, you will be taking back your nations. Well, who is this? Who are all these other nations? We are.
Yeah, and who is going to be taking it back? And that's the thing. Who is coming to take back the nations? Arise, O
Well,
God. And that is Jesus. Jesus
Exactly.
came to take
that's-
back the nations.
And that's what we'll be covering, because that is the gist, number one, of chapter 6, and it's sure the gist of chapter 7. So, all
That's
right,
a good place
let's
to
do
start.
that.
Yeah.
We can pause right here, and we'll pick up there next week. But oh my gosh, the things we can gather, and that's why I wanted to go through 1 through 4 rather quickly, because it's historical accounts. It's what happened. It's who the parties were, but 5, 6, and 7 are so important to the nation of Israel, but especially to the world. And guess where we are? We weren't raised in the Holy Land. We can't trace our family heritage back to the tribe of Jacob. Okay, some of you might, but we have no reason to believe we can, because we know we're the goy. Okay, we're part of the goy. All right, so it's these scriptures that give us our hope of salvation in Jesus Christ. All right, I hope y'all have learned something.
All right.
Sonara, once again, you've done a great job as a co-pilot.
Well, you've had to put a lot together. We're in the middle of moving, so I haven't been able to help you very much, but I learned a lot. So I'm glad to hear what all the studying you've done. You've done a good job. And I don't want you to rush through. You have probably 10, 15 more slides, but I don't want you to rush through that, because it's important. It's important.
And I don't either, y'all. I promise you. If you read if you read just a few commentators, or you read a lot of commentators, they're all almost universally going to tell you that 2 Samuel chapter 7 and 1 Chronicles chapter 17 are the two most important chapters in all of the Bible. Not for what's in the rest of the Bible, but not just for that, it is, but also because of what it means to the rest of the world. Okay. All right, y'all. We love you. Thank y'all for being faithful, and hope y'all learned something tonight. And like we said, Sonara and I said before, we're going to try to make a concerted effort not to go as long as we've gone in the past. We hate that y'all, we lose you. So we do thank you. Thank you for the comment, Wanda.
Oh, I didn't see Wanda. There we go. All right. There's Wanda. I'm glad to see her.
Okay.
Okay.
Hope y'all learned something, and we'll see y'all next Sunday night. Same time, Lord willing.
Okay.
All right,
Bye-bye.
y'all keep praying for us.